interesting when you say about taking something and making it better. I was thinking too that much of this book, and I know that you were watching this show leading up into the book, and then subsequently were watching more of it, was Mad Men, and how there's certain scenes like with the Roger Silver character that is taking from Mad Men, but the whole acid trip sequence seems to be a much more in-depth and better use of it than the similar acid trip that Roger Sterling has in Mad Men.
Well, yeah, I
It
mean,
seems like it's taking things like that are just incidental ideas and little things that the show uses, kind of usually for gimmicks, and making it far more character driven.
yeah, and Bit was the perfect character to use because he's the most outrageous character, in at least outrageous in the sense. I mean, you could say that there are ethically outrageous characters that are more outrageous than Bit, but Bit is the most out there. He's the most. He's sort of the wild card character as in this book. He's the fifth of the five major characters. He's the only one that doesn't have his own book, but this whole chapter, in a sense, serves as a de facto book within a book.
He has his future self though has Bit of Golem,
Yeah.
which they speak about many times. I forget how many bits it was. Sometimes it gets to an absurd length where they're all talking to each other at the same time. There's diegetic Bit and Joycean Bit,
Yeah.
and then there's a few other different incarnations of earlier bits that kind of meld together in that sense too. Talk about the use of the public domain material. Most of them are children's books, although they're very influential children's books, and then a few of them are more seminal books or adventure tales like Treasure Island. This is a book in toto that has a great number of memorable, fantastically rendered characters, and it seems like in the public domain with these books, there's usually only one character that really stands out throughout time, like Anne Shirley and Anne of Green Gables,
Yeah.
or Tom Sawyer and Tom Sawyer, or Jim Hawkins and Long John Silver and Treasure Island. Whereas this book is just hewn with many great characters that are constantly interacting with each other.
Well, yeah, and also in this book, like with the public domain, I wanted to use the children's characters because Bit von Rheingold, in a sense, in this book, he's very much an embodiment of what people would call the child. He has no inner censor. Even in the non-acid trip parts of the book, he moons Howard Cosell. He's doing all kinds of outrageous things. I think he comes one time with like electrodes on his nipples or something. And there's the one really funny scene too one of my favorite scenes is where he hires a dwarf actress to do a pornography scene, and they're talking about her acting basically as a human pig, and they're talking as if they're talking about like some great acting technique. But you know, a lot of the books and stuff that I chose, I wanted to choose because they were things that I enjoyed, but they also allowed for greater exploration of the character. For example, I chose Tom Sawyer rather than Huckleberry Finn for a good reason, and that is that Huckleberry Finn got his depth and explication as a deeper character within his titular book. Whereas Tom Sawyer, the original book, I think, is a great kids book. And then he has two bland sequels, Tom Sawyer Abroad and Tom Sawyer Kid or Boy Detective. And Huckleberry Finn narrates them. And here, Tom, in fact, sort of rebels against, why is Huckleberry Finn narrating my story, kind of thing. But I wanted to bring Tom Sawyer a bit farther out. I wanted to make Mowgli from the Jungle Book a bit more than just an ape boy. Jim Hawkins, whereas Tom Sawyer in his first book, Tom Sawyer, is more of a talker than a walker. Jim Hawkins is the epitome of the walker character in that he goes out and he goes on a ship, and just maybe a year or two older, about the same age as Tom Sawyer might be, he's actually doing things. The three female characters, Dorothy Gale from the Oz books, I did want to use her because I did want to explore certain aspects of the other books besides The Wizard of Oz. Then there's Alice from Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, and there's a lot of psychological resonance with her. And then Anne Shirley, of course, because she's the oldest of the three characters, and I thought it'd just be interesting to have Jim and Tom Sawyer vying to get her, especially with Bit saying, have you sniffed her panties or whatever he might say about it, because it's kind of outrageous to have that. But even before he meets the children's characters, the two Bits accidentally end up getting the town to lynch. I think it's was it Rip Van Winkle? Yeah, I think they
Yes.
end up lynching Rip Van Winkle. Later on, Bit in an angry fit pushes off a major character from the Tale of Genji, which is generally considered the first real novel, not the first Western novel, Don Quixote, although I do have Don Quixote, and Bit von Rheingold interacts with Sancho Panza. I wanted to put him in a play or two. That's why I have Clifford Odets there. And talking of the public domain, that I can have Clifford Odets, and I even have my Clifford Odets gives Bit the right to use his words, but he can't use them. There's some force stopping him back from using the real Clifford Odets' words, and so this leads into the questioning of the reality that Bit is in, as well as the public domain laws and their stupidity. And then, but I am able to quote from Oscar Wilde, and so Bit and his various incarnations slip in and out. They, they go through a number of different. I think there's probably about 20 or 25 different books that they slip in and out of. They repeat things here or there, and you get, I think, a greater explication of the characters. Marilla from Anne of Green Gables seems to like Bit for some reason or another, and there's all kinds of little asides. I mean, it's so large a thing, but it all comes back again sweeping to and Roger Corman, the B filmmaker, is also one of the major characters of this digression, and so it's a way of using the public domain, showing how you can use it creatively. It's a way of like I said, giving an interior psychological resonance to the outer things that happen in the rest of the book, and it just sort of grew on its own. How to do it, how to get it all together, and then once we get past the first part of that, you get to the second part where it's, I think, an alternate version of how Paulie and Carla met, and she's pulling nose hairs, tweezing nose hairs as he's driving. They get into an accident, almost into an accident, and then it just gets more and more pared down. And the Planet of the Apes epigraph, sort of puts this in perspective, because it's talking about time bends and the squeezing of time, and everything. Space is boundless. It squanders a man's ego. But the opposite is true with Bit. Bit's ego seems to get enlarged here. So there's a give and take with the quote, but that's a quote I wanted to use for many years somewhere in a poem or whatnot. But it was perfect for this chapter.
I think it also works in the way that F for Fake works. Orson Welles' great, fake documentary. Depending on how adept you are with these stories and what you know of culture, you're going to read different things into this than someone just coming to these stories with no knowledge of them whatsoever. And there's certain scenes that I've read many times when I was a child that I could instantly know of the scene when it came up, just as and then have that played upon too, which is something F for Fake couldn't do, when these scenes are changed and altered and intermingled. The Jim Hawkins and Tom Sawyer relationship is kind of an interesting one. There's sort of a silly love triangle between them and Shirley, but when you said that Jim Hawkins was a walker and not a talker, he goes on the is it the Essex or is it the Pequod?
The Pequod.
I don't recall. He goes on the Pequod, and when Sawyer sees this action, he wants to join him. So if he has a leader of some sort, then he's able to get out of just being a talker, not a walker image. So there's character development within the public domain characters, which is kind of astounding when it gets to towards the end, and they all seem like they're going to be left with a lot of loose ends, and then it all goes back to Bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is his acid trip. And another thing that by taking out the acid trip and putting it early in the book and then later in the book, that's from what I've heard with people with acid trips that they have recurrent trips, or they had recurrent trips, at least in the 60s and 70s. This is what people said. Maybe acid is more refined now. I don't know. But since it happens earlier, we don't know necessarily if this is a literary technique employed by Dan Schneider, a technique employed by Manny Cole, what the role that the editor, Elaine, what's her name, Elaine Shore is doing, or is this really Bit? Yeah, or is this really Bit perhaps having taken acid near the beginning of the book, and then so he that this in 1967 isn't him maybe taking the acid, it's just him maybe sleeping and having and we're fully experiencing what we only saw glimpses of before. And so there are many ways that you can look at that too, because again, Bit, I mean, certainly Bit, like he says, he's a perverse little Jewish dwarf who likes to be shat upon, so he's pretty fucked up.
The acid trip also seems to it's hilarious to see him try to mimic the vernacular of some of these books. When he goes into Robin Crusoe, for instance, and he starts talking poetic oaths and everything, that's hysterical.
Oh, thou with Robinson Crusoe, shalt I stick a finger up my ass or something, so yeah, that's always funny. And I know Jessica was just talking today about how sometimes people here in Texas think that she's from Europe because of her accent. So you get Bit being misread in many ways by some of these other characters, like Sancho Panza or whatnot. One of my favorite digressions is into the Oscar Wilde, the importance of being earnest. Where all of a sudden I think Bit at some point becomes aware that they're not just speaking, that they switched from actual novel form to just speaking with their names, and Bit somehow becomes aware of the fact that now they'll say Bit and then he says something, and so he becomes aware of different artifices too. So anyway.